Hey friends, welcome once again to your channel, Viral Story. The story that we bring you today, I'm sure that none will ever stop tearing up. So don't move and stay with me until the end. A child walks up to her mother to give her a hug and say farewell, but she finds something strange and she decides to interrupt the funeral. Little Katie's life was full of joy until she was 9 years old. She lived with her mother and her stepfather, both of whom showered her with a great deal of love, and she'd received an enormous money as an inheritance from her father. Nevertheless, everything came crashing down when she unexpectedly lost her mother, and while she was at the funeral of her mother, she saw something that made her scream, which caused the funeral to be cut short. She was able to unearth a dreadful lie thanks to the sharpness of her vision. This was, without a shadow of a doubt, the worst day of Katie's whole life. Her mother was placed inside the casket and laid to rest. It appeared as though the woman who had unrivaled beauty was sleeping. They made fun of her ghostly pallor and her delicate use of natural cosmetics, which gave her face an angelic appearance. Two people were weeping uncontrollably next to the casket as it lay there. The mother of the woman and the grandmother of the little girl, as well as the little girl who had become an orphan as a result of the death of her father in a workplace accident when she was only 3 years old, and now her mother also. The little girl had a lot of affection for her father, but the truth was that she didn't have any memories of him because she was too little when he'd been with her. It was her mother's job to explain to her how exceptional Adam's relationship had been with her. The father was a millionaire. His parents owned a sausage firm, and he was an only child. Because of this, he had promised his daughter that he would work day and night so that the family money would continue to rise and she'd have the security of knowing what her future holds. Katie's mother, Amanda, enjoyed a happy life next to her husband, the man she cherished and called hers. When they got married, they promised each other that they would have at least 4 children so that their child could experience the joy of having siblings. This was because he had never had siblings of his own. Because of his low financial resources, his cousin Robert, who was the son of his mother's sister, had resided in his house for some time. Robert was his closest living relative. Robert felt as though his entire life had been taken away from him when Amanda and Aidan got married because he'd spent his entire life with Aidan. However, his uncles assured him that from that point forward, he would be treated just like one of their own children. The couple started their lives together in the new home that they had just purchased together. However, due to Amanda's multiple polyclinics, they had trouble conceiving, and it was only after undergoing a number of treatments that they were finally able to realize their long-held goal of being parents. Amanda experienced a completely healthy pregnancy up until the final week, when she began to show signs of high blood pressure and ultimately needed to have a cesarean section to deliver her baby. After the mother and daughter had successfully recovered from the C-section and returned home the following day, Aidan approached his father with the request to look after them for the next 30 days. The truth is that the young man was content, but a few months later, he would learn some very disheartening news, and that his wife had started to present bradycardia, for which they did a series of tests and discovered that her heart was beating very slowly because her thyroid was very inflamed. Due to the fact that she had an increase in blood pressure, the doctors advised them that they should not have any more children because doing so would put her life in grave danger. Aidan decided to follow the advice of doctors and became much more attached to Katie as he came to terms that they would never have another child. Amanda, who was in a great deal of distress but knew that she had no choice but to resign herself, after that agonizing instant, 2 years passed, and they spent those 2 years living a happy life with their daughter. It wasn't until one morning that a boiler exploded, taking the lives of 3 persons, including Aidan, as the young guy was supervising the making of the sausages. The news was devastating for Amanda's family, and it left her feeling hopeless and helpless. After that unfortunate event, Robert, Aidan's cousin, stepped up to the plate and assumed responsibility for assisting the girl and treating her as if he were her own father. 3 years later, he married the woman who had been his cousin's widow, which made his aunt and uncle very pleased. As a result, they granted him the position in the firm that Aidan had previously held. There was not a single thing wrong. Robert was a fantastic man and a wonderful father to the girl, and he loved her with all his heart because Robert had been able to replace the vacuum that Aidan had left in her life. He attended the daughter's school performance where she danced and helped her with her homework while her mother worked at the shop she'd opened in order to support herself. On the day that the tragedy occurred, everything was meant to be extra spectacular. Since Amanda was celebrating her 38th birthday with a big party with her friends and had prepared a big get-together, she set off for the bakery in order to ensure that the sandwiches and the cakes she had bought were of the standard she expected. She was requested to attend an earlier taste by the founders of the company, and she invited Robert to come along with her. However, because he had another appointment scheduled, it was impossible for Robert to join her at the tasting. She got in her deluxe van and drove off in the direction she needed to go. But as she exited her vehicle with her bag in her hand, she was ambushed by a criminal who grabbed her by the waist and told her not to make any noise because he had a gun and he could pull the trigger. Amanda informed the aggressor that he could take anything he wanted, but please to spare her life. She then was instructed by the aggressor to get back in the car, and the two of them drove off together. All of this was captured by the bakery surveillance cameras as it happened. The man kidnapped her, drove her to the outskirts of the city, stole her stuff, and then shot her in the abdomen, which ultimately resulted in her death. A bagger who was strolling about the neighborhood heard the noise, and when he came at the scene, he found the woman in the process of passing away. There was also her expensive handbag and SUV car. The man noticed that she had left her cell phone at the car, so he used it to contact emergency services. After arriving at the scene to conduct out the necessary investigations, the authorities came to the conclusion that it had been a fight that had a tragic ending. The process was straightforward, and they finished handling the situation quite quickly. Katie would now be living with her adoptive father, Robert, because he's Katie's father's cousin and Amanda's legal husband. This news left Amanda's mother in a state of complete and utter devastation, and the pain she felt was compounded. The grandmother wanted to keep her grandchild, but Robert, who was a very caring man, explained to her that she was too elderly to provide care for the kid. He reassured her, however, that she would always be able to be by the girl's side. The grandmother was very upset with this news, but because the man was such a capable surrogate father, the woman was able to maintain her composure. The second problem is that Katie was her father's only child, therefore she had inherited his money. However, her father's will said that she wouldn't be able to collect it until she turned 18, so this presents a problem. In the meanwhile, her mother served as the executor of her estate. However, when her mother passed away and Robert was appointed as her guardian, Robert would have to step into Amanda's role. At the funeral, Robert appeared to be in a state of extreme grief. They all stopped by to express their sympathies to Katie and him, who was out of control despite the fact that he gave the impression of having nerves of steel. He appeared to be overcome with emotion and hopelessness, and he could not stop crying. People had a lot of compassion for him since it was clear that he was going through a lot of pain, and some people even stated that he was more impacted than Katie. People saw how much pain he was in and felt sad for him. During the entire funeral, Robert did not want to part with the casket in which he had buried his wife Amanda. This analogy is incredibly awkward, but Robert was just like the girl in that regard. But when Katie came back from the cafeteria to say goodbye to her mother, she saw that there was something odd about the stepfather. The young lady noticed that her stepfather, who was sobbing in close proximity to the coffin, was wearing a ring on his finger. She was startled and began yelling as soon as she realized what had happened. The funeral came to a standstill. Everyone who was there was shocked. Nobody, not even the closest of acquaintances, had any idea what was going on. Katie immediately began screaming, "You brat! Are you responsible for the death of my mother? Where did you get that ring?" Robert was shocked. He struggled to get his words out and then said, "Dear daughter, your mother was the one who presented me with this beautiful ring. You are aware that her love for me was equal to the love I had for both her and you." When Katie heard this answer, she immediately realized that her stepfather was the one who was responsible for the death of her mother, because the girl had given that ring to a poor woman on the day that she passed away. And in addition to that, Katie had never seen the ring because Katie hid it in a compartment in her mother's purse and didn't tell her anything about it. She planned to tell her to buy some treats the next 2 days so that her mother would open that compartment in her bag and find her birthday present. As a result, Katie realized that her stepfather had taken her mother's life, as well as her valuables, including her costly ring. A policeman, who was a friend of the family, was attending at the funeral, and he arrested Robert upon hearing what happened. After doing an investigation, they came to the conclusion that Robert was in fact the murderer of Amanda. He intended to continue serving as Katie's executor of assets while also attempting to eliminate her so that he could keep her riches. He was sentenced to spend the remainder of his life behind bars. Katie makes regular trips to the cemetery to pay respects to her mother's grave, and her grandmother is responsible for watching over her. In addition, she went to visit her grandfather and grandmother on her father's side of the family every other weekend.